6 months ago, my life fell apart when I found out that my husband Mark was cheating on me with some young girl from his office. I think I should have seen this coming: late nights at work, cryptic text messages, sudden interest in working on weekends. But when you're busy raising a 6-year-old child, when your head is full of endless to-do lists, when you live in constant fatigue mode, you don't always notice the obvious, even if it literally screams in your face. My name is Tessa, and at the age of 30, I never thought I'd have to start my life all over again. But that's exactly what I'm doing. Now I'm a single mother living in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Seattle, just a 15-minute drive from my parents' house. Back then, when everything collapsed, when I urgently needed to decide what to do next, moving closer to them seemed like a logical, even the right decision. Although, to be honest, our relationship has always been difficult, and now that I see them more often, it doesn't get any better. But I had no choice. Tommy, my son, needed stability, and whether I like it or not, my parents were part of that stability. I was lucky. I quickly found a good job at a marketing company. The salary is decent. I really like the job. The colleagues are pleasant. The bosses are adequate. The only problem is business trips. Nothing serious, just for a day or two, but that's when the fun begins. When I first asked my parents to look after Tommy during my trip, one would have thought that I was asking them for something unheard of, almost demanding that they sacrifice something vital. My father just rolled his eyes, muttering something under his breath, and my mother, crossing her arms over her chest, said with displeasure, "We're retired, Tessa. We weren't going to become full-time babysitters at our age." I clenched my teeth, feeling the heat rise on my cheeks, but I gathered myself and answered, "I know. I'll pay you." As if by magic, their attitude immediately changed. It felt like I'd turned an invisible lever, and now they were discussing whether they could fit it into their schedule. Of course, they didn't miss the opportunity to remind me how much of an inconvenience this was, but they agreed nonetheless. Miracles, that's all. My sister Sarah, by the way, can drop in at any time with her 2 children, and they greet her almost with fanfare. Just last week, she showed up unannounced with her youngest son in her arms, and my mom immediately threw up her hands and exclaimed with delight, "Oh, my precious angels." Dad immediately rushed to get a cookie jar, and I could have sworn I saw him even smile. At the same time, when I bring Tommy, they behave as if I brought them an old box with unnecessary things that they don't know how to get rid of. The last time we visited them, Mom literally said from the doorway, "Tommy, honey, go play in the guest room," and then she turned to me with that look I learned to hate a long time ago. She paused, as if deliberately delaying the moment, and then said, "Mrs. Henderson's son recently divorced. He's a dentist. Very successful." I rolled my eyes, even though I knew it was pointless to argue. "Mom, I'm not interested in being framed," I replied, trying to sound as calm as possible. It seemed like I was saying this phrase for the 100th time. I need time to focus on Tommy and on my career. The father, who had been sitting silently in an armchair up to that moment, chuckled and threw, "That's your problem, Tessa. You're too picky." No wonder Mark left. I felt a wave of irritation wash over me, but I didn't say anything. What an irony. Sarah has never had a permanent job. She has 2 children with different men. Now she lives off a new boyfriend. But for some reason it is me who is the disappointment of the family, because my husband turned out to be a traitor. "Have you even thought about Dr. Roberts' son?" my mom asked yesterday when she returned Tommy to me after my last business trip. He's only been divorced twice. And in the second case, it's not even his fault. I've learned not to react to their words, because if I get angry and argue, it will be worse for me. This, of course, does not mean that their comments do not offend me. I just let them pass by. In the end, I have no choice. They are Tommy's grandparents, and despite their obvious bias in favor of Sarah and her children, I need their help. But sometimes, late at night, when Tommy is already asleep and I'm lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling, it's hard for me to hold back heavy thoughts. I was lying on a hard hospital bed, feeling my breathing getting heavier with each breath, and my chest was constricted as if someone had pulled it with iron hoops, and I was trying to process what I had just heard. My mother's voice still sounded in my head, cold, distant, almost irritated, as if my illness was not a disaster, not an alarm, but just another inconvenience squeezed into her carefully scheduled schedule. They're going on a trip. They can't cancel their plans. They can't help. Mom, do you even understand that I'm in the hospital? I have severe pneumonia. I won't be able to take care of Tommy. My voice was shaking, not so much from illness as from approaching panic, but all I heard in response was a sigh full of exhaustion, as if I were a teenager demanding the impossible again. Tessa, I understand that you're in a difficult situation, but it's time for you to learn how to handle yourself. Her mother's voice was calm, as if she were giving a lecture. We've already paid for the trip. We can't cancel it because of your problems. My problems? My throat was dry. I could hardly catch my breath. Mom, it's not just a problem, it's a hospital stay. It's a disease, a serious disease. I need someone to take care of Tommy, he's a kid. There was silence on the other end of the line, and I almost believed that she realized that she was about to say something reassuring, but then her voice, calm and even, dashed my hopes. We can't help you, Tessa. Figure it out for yourself. Beeps. She just hung up. I dropped the phone onto my chest, feeling hot tears running down my cheeks, and my throat constricted with a lump of pain that mixed resentment, rage, and horror. They left me. My own parents, people who should have been there for me, who always talked about family values, preferred relaxing on the beach to helping their sick daughter. I was shaking either from fever or anger. I took a deep breath, but it was a mistake. My chest tingled as if thousands of needles had pierced my lungs. I clutched the sheet, trying not to moan in pain, and forced myself to think. I needed to find someone to look after Tommy. Sarah? No, even if she wanted to help, and she won't, you can't trust her with a goldfish, let alone a child. Friends? Yes, I have a few girlfriends, but everyone has their own families, jobs, and worries. I could feel the panic rising in my throat, but I couldn't allow myself to succumb to it. I grabbed my phone and frantically scrolled through my contact list, trying to find someone who could help me. Finally, my gaze settled on one name. Lauren. My colleague, with whom we have become friends over the past few months. We weren't close friends, but she was one of the few people who really cared about me, who didn't look at me with condescension or pity. Maybe she'd be willing to help. I pressed the call button, and as the rings dragged on, each seeming to measure a second of my despair, I prayed that she would answer. Tessa. Her cheerful voice rang out, but it was immediately replaced by alarm. Are you okay? Your voice, you sound terrible. Lauren. My voice broke, and I clutched the phone like it was a lifeline. Of course. What happened? I took a deep breath, trying to pull myself together, and quickly explained the situation, that I was in the hospital, that I had no one to leave Tommy with, that my parents had refused to help. With every sentence I said, her voice became more and more worried. Oh, Tessa. Lauren exhaled, and I was about to hear a rejection, but instead she said, Of course, I will help. Tommy can stay with me as long as it takes. I closed my eyes, feeling a long, shaky sigh of relief escape my chest. Thank you. Lauren, thank you so much. You have no idea how important this is to me. Don't worry, her voice was soft but confident. Everything will be fine. You just focus on getting better, and I'll take care of Tommy. I turned off the call and dropped the phone on my chest, feeling tears running down my cheeks, but now they were tears of relief. For the first time that nightmarish day, I felt like I wasn't alone, that there was at least one person who cared. The nurse came into the room, checking the 4-line, and said softly, You need to rest, Miss Hunt. You have a long rehabilitation ahead of you. I nodded, but my thoughts were still racing through my head like startled birds. Is everything going to be okay? Won't Tommy be scared? Will Lauren be able to handle it? But I couldn't change anything. I could only trust her. And I hope that my parents will someday understand what choice they made. Lauren. I stared at her name on the screen, and my insides tightened with doubt. We were more like friends than close friends. Sometimes we went to lunch together, discussed work, complained to each other about the boss, laughed at ridiculous client requests. But could I ask her for such a thing? To take my son away, even for a few days, to completely rebuild his life for us? It was too much. But I had no choice. I closed my eyes, took a deep, shuddering breath, and pressed her contact. The phone rang, and with each ring, my heart was pounding faster, my palms were sweating, and I felt my whole body tremble not only from the temperature, but also from the fear of being rejected. Finally, her voice came on the other end of the line, cheerful but immediately wary when she apparently sensed something was amiss. Tessa. What happened? Are you okay? I swallowed, trying to calm the lump in my throat, but my voice still sounded weak, hoarse, strained. Lauren, I need help. I literally squeezed out these words, because it was beyond my strength to ask for such a thing. I'm in the hospital. Severe pneumonia. The doctors said that I need to stay here for at least 2 weeks. I paused, afraid to continue, but I realized that it was too late to back down. I have no one to leave Tommy with. My parents, they refused to help. There was silence for several long seconds, but then Lauren spoke, and there was no doubt in her voice. Oh my God, Tessa, of course I'll help. Where is Tommy now? I blinked, not immediately believing my ears. He's at my parents', but in 3 days they need to travel. I almost spat out the words, and they'll literally throw him out on the street. These people are just. Lauren exhaled sharply, clearly restraining herself, but immediately switched to the main thing. Look, don't worry. I'll take the day off tomorrow and pick up Tommy. I'll keep him as long as I need him. You just think about your recovery, okay? I closed my eyes, feeling another lump rise in my throat, this time with relief. Lauren, I do not know how to thank you, she interrupted. It's Tommy. He's a wonderful kid, and you're my friend. Of course I'll help. That's it, get some rest. I'll take care of everything tomorrow. She passed out, and I lay there staring at the ceiling, unable to believe that someone who wasn't related to me by blood was the only one who really extended a helping hand. The next morning, as soon as I woke up, I saw a message from Lauren on my phone. I have Tommy. Everything is fine. Don't worry. I almost burst into tears right in the hospital room. The next few days passed in a kind of painful haze. The doctors injected me with antibiotics, forced me to breathe through an oxygen mask, my body ached, and my consciousness kept falling into a heavy sleep. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night with a coughing fit, gasping for air in a panic, but as soon as I picked up my phone and reread a short message from Lauren, I felt a little better. Tommy is safe. He didn't stay outside. A week passed, and one afternoon, when I was just starting to feel a little better, there was a knock on the door of the ward. I thought it was another nurse, but when the door opened, I saw Lauren. She was standing on the threshold, holding a paper bag from the cafe in one hand and something wrapped in colored paper in the other. You look like death, she said with a smile, coming closer. I laughed hoarsely, though I immediately started coughing. Thanks, I murmured. She put the bag on the bedside table next to the bed and sat on the chair next to it. It's coffee and your favorite croissant. I'm not sure if you can eat it yet, but just know what I brought. And also, she handed me a package. This is from Tommy. I carefully unwrapped the paper, and my heart skipped a beat. There was a child's drawing inside. Tommy and I, painted in clumsy childish strokes, were holding hands. A big yellow sun was shining in the sky above us, and on the side, in a crooked childish handwriting, it was written, "Get well soon, Mommy." I hugged the drawing to my chest and closed my eyes. I might be lonely in this city, I might not have family support, but I knew one thing for sure: I have Tommy. And now there's Lauren. And, perhaps for the first time in a long time, I had hope. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the last few days pressing down on me, as my body feels strange, broken, weak, and my mind keeps falling into disturbing dreams where Tommy stands alone on the threshold of my parents' house, clutching his favorite toy in his hands, and they, indifferent, turn around and leave, not even looking around. I shuddered violently, opening my eyes, and immediately felt pain flare up in my lungs, as if red-hot needles had pierced every cell, causing me to cough so hard that my vision went dark. I took a deep breath through the oxygen mask, trying to calm the attack, and looked at the phone screen. A message from Patricia: "I have Tommy. It's all good. He smiles." I reread these words several times, feeling a warm wave of relief spread in my chest. Tommy is no longer in the home of people who were ready to leave him on the street because he interfered with their plans. He's safe. With a woman who, no matter how she treated me, always adored her grandson. I remembered her icy gaze at the table at family dinners, her perfect posture, impeccable outfits, and barely noticeable smirks when she found a new way to embarrass me. She never spoke directly, but each of her comments was a punch, carefully veiled behind politeness. "Oh, Tessa, do you work in marketing? How interesting. I always thought Mark would find someone with a more serious career." Or, "Do you really give Tommy ready meals?" In my day, good mothers cooked their own lunches for their children. And now she was the one who had never accepted me into her family, the one who was relieved to erase my name from her life immediately after the divorce, was the only person who did not turn away, who unhesitatingly took Tommy and stayed with him until I could return home. I dialed her number, and he immediately answered the call, as if she was waiting for my call. "Patricia." My voice was still weak, but I put all the gratitude I could into those words. "Thanks." "Don't thank me." Her voice was flat, but there was no usual coldness in it. "Tommy is my grandson. And no matter how I treat you, he will always be my family." I closed my eyes, letting those words sink in. Is he feeling okay? I couldn't help but worry. He's not scared? Of course I'm scared, Patricia sighed, and for the first time there was a hint of weariness in her voice. He spent several days with people who treated him like a burden. But now he's here with me. We had lunch, watched his favorite cartoons, and I put him to bed. It's going to be okay, Tessa. I almost burst into tears at those words. If he asks about me, tell him I'm okay. Tell them I'll be back soon. Of course, was the short answer, but there was understanding in it. I was about to hang up, but suddenly Patricia said, "And one more thing, Tessa." I froze. I never thought that your parents could be so. She hesitated for a second, as if choosing a word, selfish. Even I didn't expect this. I couldn't help but laugh, softly, hoarsely, but there was so much bitterness in that laugh that it sounded more like a sigh. "Welcome to my life," I murmured. Maybe, Patricia paused, maybe I was being too hard on you. I opened my mouth, but the words stuck in my throat. Is she? Recognizes it? Patricia, who looked at me with disapproval for years, who disliked me from the first day I met. "Sleep, Tessa," she added after a short pause. "I'll take care of Tommy." I turned off the phone and lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the tension that had held me captive for the past few days slowly dissolve. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone. The first photo came just a few hours after Patricia picked up Tommy. In the picture, my son was smiling at the camera, holding an ice cream cone in his hand, which had already begun to melt and run down his fingers in sticky strips, and a melted sweet mass was white around his lips. He looked happier than he had in the last few weeks. There was a caption at the bottom: "Someone wanted ice cream on Sunday afternoon." I stared at the photo for a long time, almost studying it, and suddenly realized that I was smiling, despite the stabbing pain in my chest. Tommy was safe. He was eating ice cream, laughing, and there was a man next to him who wasn't going to leave him for tickets to sunny California. New photos came in during the day. Here's Tommy sitting at the kitchen table, brows drawn together in a serious expression, diligently writing letters in a notebook, homework done. Here he is standing at the stove in a baby's apron, stirring something in a pot, and next to him, Patricia is watching him with a slight smile, the future chef. The next picture shows his proud face in front of a fortress of pillows scattered on the floor, and the caption, "Mission accomplished." Each image was like a small piece of a house, breaking through the sterile walls of the hospital, bringing with it a feeling of warmth and tranquility. And then the video came. Tommy appeared on the screen, sitting on the floor with shining eyes, and in front of him was a large box with a new puzzle. "Look what Grandma gave me," he said enthusiastically to the camera, and then turned it so that Patricia, sitting cross-legged next to him, among the scattered puzzle pieces, got into the frame. I watched and couldn't believe that this was the same woman who hadn't even tried to build a normal relationship with me before. The one who always kept her distance, who looked at me with disapproval. Now she was sitting on the floor in my living room and putting together a puzzle with my son. The days passed faster, and I finally focused on recovery, strictly following the doctor's instructions, doing breathing exercises, patiently enduring injections and endless IVs. I needed to get home faster. Now I knew that they were really waiting for me there. After a week of treatment, the doctors finally allowed me to receive visitors, and the day I found out about it, my heart started beating faster. And then, in the early morning, when I was still barely able to sit without support, I heard the sound of running feet in the hallway. The door opened abruptly, and Tommy burst into the room, his face beaming with joy. "Mommy." I barely had time to open my arms before he rushed to me, but at the last moment, as if remembering that I shouldn't worry too much, he froze, hugging me carefully, as if I were made of glass. I hugged him to me, inhaling the familiar scent of baby shampoo and sweets, and felt a lump rise in my throat. "Oh, Tommy," I breathed, stroking his hair. "We've brought you some decent food," Patricia's voice rang out. I looked up and saw her standing in the doorway with a thermos bag in her hands. "Hospital food is not good for recovery," she added, walking into the room and unpacking the containers. The aroma of homemade soup, fresh bread, and something sweet immediately wafted through the air. I noticed lemon squares in one of the containers, which are my favorites. Once, many years ago, at one of the family dinners, I casually mentioned that I loved them, but then I was sure that Patricia did not even pay attention to my words. While Tommy chatted incessantly and told me about how the week had gone, I looked at Patricia, noticing how her expression had changed. He no longer had the eternal reserve, the coldness that I was used to. She listened to me when I talked about my treatment, asked questions, really interested in the answers. Her visits have become my daily highlight. Each time she brought something new: books, magazines, hot dishes, toys for Tommy. She told me funny stories about how he tried to cook, how he once dropped a glass of juice on himself and laughed himself, how he insisted on reading aloud before going to bed because that's what Mom did. But one day, when Tommy was busy with his new coloring book, Patricia suddenly stopped talking. I noticed how she slightly clasped her hands, how her gaze darted to the side before she finally spoke. "I owe you an apology, Tessa." I froze. "For the way I've treated you all these years. I was wrong." I almost dropped the spoon I just brought hot soup to my mouth with. In all the years that I've known this woman, she's never admitted to her mistakes. Patricia pursed her lips slightly. Her gaze became thoughtful. I thought I knew what was best for my son. I thought he should be with a woman who suits his status. She paused, then grinned, but there was bitterness in her grin. And then he left. He went to someone who only cares about his wallet. Her fingers nervously gripped the hem of her perfectly pressed blouse. I was looking at who he really married. The woman who put up with his whims, who took care of him and his family. And I was too blind to see it. I clasped my hands, not knowing what to say. "You were good for him, Tessa," she said suddenly. "You loved him not for his status and money, but for the way he really was." I felt tears coming to my eyes, but I blinked them away quickly. "Why are you telling me this?" Patricia looked away for a second, and then looked at Tommy, who, ignoring us, was tracing lines in his coloring book with colored pencils. "Because I'm ashamed," she said, and there was something unexpectedly warm in her voice. "And because now I see you for real." She slowly reached out her hand and gently touched my palm. And I, unexpectedly, did not pull my hand away. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, still not fully believing what I had heard, and I felt a strange, warm feeling unfolding in my chest, which I hadn't experienced in a very long time. Patricia didn't just take care of Tommy while I was in the hospital, didn't just bring me home cooked food, and didn't just admit that she was wrong for the first time in her life. Now she was offering me an opportunity one hadn't even dared to dream of, a job that could completely change my life, a job that would not only give me I need financial stability, but it would also allow me to develop, grow, and feel like I'm worth something. Are you serious?" I whispered, barely comprehending what I was saying. "Of course, I'm serious," Patricia's voice came on the line, full of mild surprise, as if she didn't understand why I was doubting it all. "David is a man of his word. If he says you're right for him, then that's the way it is. He wants to call you on Zoom tomorrow to discuss the details, but to be honest, I think he's already made up his mind." I took a deep breath, trying to control my emotions, hardly believing how rapidly and unexpectedly my life had changed in recent months. "Patricia," I stammered, not knowing how to express all the gratitude that was bubbling inside, "you have no idea what this means to me." "I can imagine," she replied softly. "That's why I want to help." I froze, digesting her words. She really wants to help me. Just because he wants to. "But, are you sure it won't be difficult for you to keep an eye on Tommy?" I asked, even though my heart already knew the answer. "Oh, please," she snorted, and I could almost imagine her rolling her eyes. "This child is the best thing that has ever happened to our family. I would love to spend more time with him." I pressed the phone to my ear, closing my eyes, feeling a long, trembling exhale escape from my chest. "Okay," I finally said. Then I'll try." The next few days passed in an unreal fog. I prepared my resume, reviewed my portfolio, and reread the information about David's company, trying to make sure that I was ideally suited for this job. And all this time, Tommy, who was already used to calls from Grandma Patricia, happily told her about everything in the world, about how he learned to fold airplanes out of paper, about how a drawing contest was announced in kindergarten, about how he would like to get a dog. "Do you want a dog?" Her cheerful voice rang out over the speaker. "Then you need to ask your mom." I grinned, turning to Tommy, who looked at me with wide eyes. "May I?" "What is it?" he asked excitedly. "We'll see," I replied, taking a quick glance at my laptop screen, where a video call with David was scheduled to begin in a few minutes. But while I didn't know what exactly the future held for me, I knew one thing: whatever it was, I no longer felt lonely. Because I have Tommy. And now, unexpectedly, I also have Patricia. I froze, clutching the phone tighter in my hand, feeling an unpleasant chill run down my spine. These words are a threat, a manipulation, a last-ditch attempt to force me to submit again, to take on responsibilities that they themselves did not want to bear. The irony of the situation was so absurd that my mouth went dry. Are you serious? My voice sounded flat, but everything was boiling inside. Are you threatening me that you'll just leave the kids on my doorstep? On the other end of the phone, my mother sighed heavily, but there was not a drop of remorse in her tone, just the usual irritation, as if I were making her uncomfortable again, as in childhood. We can't handle this, Tessa. Her voice became quieter, but I didn't allow myself to believe in the sincerity of those words. We are not getting any younger, your father is not in good health to chase after the kids, and, frankly, we simply do not have the means to support them. Sarah left us in a terrible situation. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to breathe deeper, more evenly, so as not to say something that I would regret later. Do you know what a terrible situation you left me in 2 years ago? I asked calmly, but there was steel in every word. Did you know that I was lying in the hospital, suffocating, exhausted, with a fever in the 40s, and begging you to help? Did you know that I had to look for strangers who could shelter my son because his own grandparents preferred a beach vacation? There was a pause, but I felt it wasn't because she realized her guilt. She was just trying to figure out how to turn the situation in her favor. Tessa. Her voice softened, but I knew that tone too well to believe it. This is different. I smiled bitterly. Of course it's different, I repeated, barely able to contain my sarcasm. Because then the injured child was my son, and now it's Sarah's children. The only difference is that I didn't leave Tommy, I did everything to keep him safe. And Sarah just left, without even leaving the children anything but a couple of sentences on a piece of paper. We couldn't help you then, the mother muttered. No, Mom, we could, I gritted my teeth. You just didn't want to. You chose rest, you chose convenience, you didn't choose me. My mother fell silent again, and I could almost hear her stifling an exasperated sigh. I knew that she didn't like being put in a corner, leaving no opportunity to justify herself. You're still our daughter, she finally said. I closed my eyes, but instead of the usual pain, I felt only emptiness. The daughter you haven't called in 2 years. She coughed nervously, but couldn't find anything to say. I won't send you any money, I said clearly, pausing after each word so that it would surely reach her. And I'm not taking Sarah's kids. But you're an aunt, her voice became harsh again, as if she wasn't trying to be polite anymore. You have to help. I closed my eyes before answering. No, Mom. I don't owe you anything. There was silence on the other end, and I almost thought she had hung up the call, but then her voice rang out, cold as ice. So you're leaving them? I felt rage flare up inside, but I was no longer the woman who 2 years ago had asked them to take care of my son for at least a short time while I was fighting for my health. I no longer needed their approval. No, Mom, I said flatly. Sarah did it. I pressed the end button, not allowing her to continue, and for a few seconds I just sat in silence, feeling my heart racing in my chest. And that's when I felt really liberated. I wasn't trying to earn their love anymore. I no longer hoped that they would change. I was no longer someone who could be broken. I got up from my chair, took a deep breath, and left the office, heading for the kitchen, where Tommy was sitting at the table, enthusiastically drawing something. Patricia was already waiting for me there, reading the newspaper and occasionally glancing at her grandson, her expression calm and warm. I walked over to her, sat down on a chair and, without saying a word, just put my hand on top of hers. She looked at me, frowning slightly. Is something wrong? I smiled, sincerely, for the first time in a long time. No, I replied. It's all right. I listened to the beeps on the handset before the call ended, and immediately blocked the number, feeling a lightness that I had not been familiar with for a long time spread throughout my body. It was like a release, like a long-awaited sigh after years spent in suffocating tension, when every word, every action had to be adjusted to the expectations of people who had never really appreciated me. It's all over now. Later that evening, sitting at the kitchen table, I watched Tommy and Patricia lean over his science project. Tommy was busily tracing a pencil across the paper, sketching a diagram of the volcano they were going to make for the school exhibit, and Patricia, wearing glasses, was reading the instructions, periodically looking up and gently telling him how best to connect the details. There was something so natural about it, so right, that I found myself thinking, this is exactly what a family should look like. Months passed. Life went on. News about my parents reached me mainly through Aunt Marta, who never missed an opportunity to share family gossip during our monthly calls. She told me about how, unable to cope with the children, they were forced to hire an expensive nanny who took away almost all their retirement savings, how their father constantly complained of fatigue, and their mother about the lack of gratitude from others. They told everyone who was willing to listen about their ungrateful youngest daughter, who abandoned the family at a difficult moment, but, as Aunt Martha noted with a note of mockery, during all this time they did not say a single bad word about Sarah. "Imagine that, Tessa," she said on the last call, and I could hear her shaking her head. "Sarah literally abandoned her children, ran away with some unknown man, leaving nothing but a piece of paper, and they are still looking for excuses for her." I wasn't surprised. Some things never change. I closed the deal on our new house last week. A spacious 4-bedroom house with a large backyard and a terrace, where I already imagined drinking coffee in the morning while watching Tommy play on the lawn. It was our place, our home, which we deserved, which we built ourselves, without expectations and obligations to those who once decided that their love could be measured in money. Patricia immediately claimed one of the vacant rooms as her own, Grandma's room, as Tommy called it, and no one argued. She was here more often than at home, and I couldn't imagine our life without her. She attended all of Tommy's football matches, helped him with his studies, discussed work with me, and brought into our lives the very care, the very maternal warmth that I always lacked. My son excelled in school, brought home excellent grades, played on the football team, and I watched him grow up happy, confident, surrounded by the love that I once missed so much. I was recently promoted to Executive Director of Marketing, and David was increasingly hinting that a path to partnership would open up for me in the future. I was no longer just surviving, I was developing, building my career, my life, my family, without looking back at those who didn't consider me important enough to stick around when I really needed to. A few weeks later, we were planning a backyard party in honor of Tommy's 10th birthday, and I threw myself into the organization, ordering decorations, choosing a cake, and planning entertainment for the guests. Tommy dreamed of a pirate theme, and Patricia and I had already discussed where to get a treasure chest and costumes for the guests. Our house was filled with laughter, light, and life. Sometimes, as I sat on the terrace, watching Tommy and Patricia tinkering in the small vegetable garden they started together, choosing where to plant new raspberry bushes, arguing about whether peppers were needed in the garden, I found myself thinking how unpredictable life could be. How the people you've been waiting for all your life, who should be by your side, can completely disappoint and betray you. How help, care, and true love can come from the most unexpected places. How losing what you thought was everything can lead you to something much better. My parents' opinion of me no longer mattered. Their words couldn't hurt me anymore. Because now I had a life that I had built on my own. A life in which love was not for sale and was not valued in money. A life in which family is not a commitment, but a choice. And I chose the right one.